My name is Cassie Reyes. I'm 24 years old. I study film at Alderton Community College. Or I did, before everything that happened. Before Hargrove. I'm recording this on my phone, sitting on the floor of my bedroom closet with the light on and the door pulled shut, because the closet is the only place in this apartment where I feel like the walls aren't watching me. I know how that sounds. 3 weeks ago, I would have laughed at myself too. I need to tell this from the beginning. All of it. Because I know, that I don't have much time left, and someone needs to know what happened inside Hargrove State Psychiatric Hospital. Someone needs to know what it did to us, what it took, what it kept, what it sent home with me. So, from the beginning, I want you to understand who these people were before I tell you what happened to them. I need you to know them as people, as real, whole, living human beings, because what this story does to them is brutal, and they deserve more than to be props in someone else's nightmare. Ryan was the one who ran the channel. You might know him. Wraith Urban Exploration, decent following, good instincts, the kind of person who made you feel safe, even in genuinely unsafe situations. I had been following his channel for 2 years before I worked up the nerve to reach out about joining the group. He was methodical, calm, experienced. He had a way of scanning a room when he first entered it that reminded me of a dog checking for threats. Quick, systematic, thorough. Not paranoid, just careful. Ryan was always careful. Marcus was Ryan's best friend since middle school, and if Ryan was the brain of any operation, then Marcus was its heart. He was a big guy, 6'2", broad, the kind of physical presence that makes a room feel smaller and safer at the same time. He had a beard he was perpetually trying to grow out and perpetually failing at, and he laughed at everything, including his own failed beard, including his own fear when a building made a sound that startled him. He laughed the way some people breathe, constantly, automatically, as natural as existing. When Marcus laughed, you laughed too. You couldn't help it. The world was just better when Marcus was in it. Deja was Marcus's girlfriend, and she was the kind of person who made you feel slightly stupid by comparison, but so gently that you couldn't resent her for it. She was a researcher by nature, the type who spent 3 weeks on background before she felt comfortable with a location. She knew Hargrove's entire history before we ever set foot in it, knew the floor plan, knew the points of access and egress, knew the county's inspection records and the security camera placements. If Deja brought you somewhere, you trusted that she had already considered every angle. You trusted her completely. Tyler was the one we called Glitch, because there was no lock, no door, no security mechanism he couldn't figure out in under 2 minutes. He was quiet, the kind of quiet that isn't shyness, but is instead a deep, observational stillness. Like he was always slightly outside the moment, watching it from an angle nobody else had access to. Tyler noticed things. He'd point out something in a room that the rest of us had walked past 3 times, and it would turn out to be the most significant thing there. He was 26, and he had kind eyes, and he played bass in a band that was never going to make it, and he knew it, and didn't care. Noah was my boyfriend. I want to be careful about how I describe Noah because I love him. Loved him. And I don't want you to laugh at him. He was an accountant. He wore sensible shoes and kept a first aid kit in his car and checked the weather app before committing to outdoor plans. He was the safest, most grounded, most thoroughly ordinary person I'd ever been with, and I mean that as the highest possible compliment. After years of dating people who were exciting in the way that hurricanes are exciting, dramatic and destructive and always leaving damage behind, Noah was a warm room. Noah was a Sunday morning. He had absolutely no business being in an abandoned psychiatric hospital at midnight, and he knew it, and he came anyway, because I was going, and he wasn't going to let me go without him. That's who Noah was. That's the kind of love he had, the kind that shows up even when it's terrified. And then there's me, Cassie. I had a camera and a dream and a boyfriend who loved me more than I probably deserved, and I wanted to make films that meant something. And I thought filming in an abandoned asylum was going to give me the footage of my life. I was right about that last part, just not the way I meant it. I need to tell you about Hargrove, the way Deja told it to us, because context matters. Because the things that happened inside that building didn't come from nowhere. They came from decades of accumulated suffering, pressed into concrete and steel until the building itself was saturated with it. Until the building remembered. Hargrove State Psychiatric Hospital opened in 1891. It was called, at that time, the Hargrove County Home for the Mentally Infirm, which tells you everything you need to know about the philosophy that built it. Not a place of healing, a place of containment, a warehouse for inconvenient minds dressed up in the language of medicine. By the 1940s, it housed over 1,200 patients in a building designed for 400. The overcrowding was documented, reported, and ignored. Patients slept on floors, in hallways, in rooms so packed that disease moved through the population like fire through dry grass. There were outbreaks of tuberculosis, of typhoid. The mortality rate during these years was something that the County Board of Health chose, consistently and deliberately, not to examine too closely. But the overcrowding wasn't the worst of it. The worst of it arrived in 1934 in the form of Dr. Edmund Voss. Voss came with credentials, with publications, with a carefully cultivated reputation as a pioneer in psychiatric medicine. He was handsome in a severe way. Photographs from the period show a tall man with a precise part in his hair and eyes that looked, even in black and white, like they were calculating something. He was charming in formal settings. Staff who worked under him described him as brilliant and unsettling in equal measure, a man whose intelligence you could feel like a physical pressure when he entered a room. What Voss believed, fundamentally, was that the mentally ill brain was a machine that had gotten stuck. And like any stuck machine, it needed to be shocked back into proper function. He expanded the electroconvulsive therapy program at Hargrove to a scale that had never been seen in any institution in the state. Patients, regardless of diagnosis, regardless of severity, regardless of age, were subjected to ECT sessions multiple times per week. The machines Voss used were calibrated to deliver currents far beyond what any established medical protocol recommended. He kept meticulous notes, clinical and detached, describing the results in the language of experiment rather than the language of care. The anesthesia budget was cut in 1936. The sessions continued. If you have never heard the sound of electroconvulsive therapy administered without anesthesia, I want you to sit with that for a moment. I want you to really try to imagine it. The body seizing against the restraints. The involuntary sounds that a human throat makes when the brain is flooded with electricity and the conscious mind has no way to process or control what's happening to it. The smell. And there is a smell. There is always a smell when electricity meets skin and hair and the wet interior of a living body. Staff who worked at Hargrove during this period, interviewed decades later, described the treatment wing as a place that made them feel physically ill even on days when no sessions were scheduled. The walls had absorbed something. The air held it. You could feel it when you walked in, they said. A heaviness, a pressure, like the building was holding its breath. Then there were the isolation rooms. Voss called his program Isolation Immersion Therapy, and the name has a clinical cleanliness to it that completely obscures what it actually was. Patients deemed resistant to ECT, which meant, in practice, patients who hadn't been sufficiently broken by it, were moved to individual rooms in the basement of the East Wing. These rooms had been specially constructed at Voss's request. Walls lined with a dense material that absorbed sound, sealed doors with no interior handles, a slot at the base for passing food through. No windows, no light source of any kind, No human contact, sensory deprivation so complete that the baseline activity of the human nervous system, with nothing external to process, begins to generate its own input. Hallucinations so vivid and so real that patients could not distinguish them from reality. Some patients spent days in these rooms, some spent weeks. The records are incomplete, deliberately so. Voss kept two sets of documentation, the official record and a private journal that was discovered after his retirement, and then lost again in a bureaucratic shuffle that several historians have described as suspiciously convenient. What survived of the private journal described results that Voss recorded with what reads as genuine excitement. Patients who entered the isolation rooms confused or agitated came out, he wrote, cleansed, simplified, returned to a workable baseline. What they actually came out as, based on staff testimony, was something closer to empty. People who had been difficult and resistant and loud became quiet. Still, they followed instructions without processing them. They stopped asking questions. They stopped, in some cases, speaking at all. Some didn't come out. The official cause of death was listed as cardiac arrest. Voss noted in his journal, in a passage that turns my stomach every time I think about it, that these outcomes were acceptable losses in the advancement of the science. Hargrove closed in 1987. Budget cuts, they said. Reform measures, they said. The patients were transferred to other facilities in a process that was chaotic and poorly documented and left several people falling through the cracks of a system that had never been particularly careful about catching them. The staff was let go. The building was locked, and the county promised to figure out what to do with it, and then, as counties do, forgot about it entirely. 37 years. That's how long Hargrove sat empty before we walked into it. 37 years of silence, of darkness, of whatever had accumulated in those walls over nearly a century of suffering with nothing to interrupt it, nothing to let it out. I think about that a lot now. What happens to a place that has held that much pain for that long, with no release? I think about what it becomes, what it wants. I think Hargrove was hungry by the time we got there. I think it had been hungry for a very long time. It was a Friday night in October, cold enough that our breath fogged, but not cold enough to be genuinely miserable, which felt like the universe offering us one small mercy before withdrawing all the others. We met in the parking lot of a gas station 2 miles from Hargrove at 11:15 p.m., gear checked, phones charged, the kind of quiet energy moving through the group that I had come to recognize from previous explorers, excitement wearing the mask of calm. Noah had brought chamomile tea in a thermos. He offered it to Marcus, who accepted it with the seriousness it deserved. Deja walked us through the entry point one more time. Service entrance, north side, hidden behind overgrowth. 2 security cameras at the main gate, neither of them covering the north approach. Chain on the service door, Tyler's problem. From there, north wing administrative corridor. Then we assess and plan based on what we find. She made it sound so orderly. The walk from where we parked to the service entrance took about 10 minutes through a field that had once been a lawn and was now something more ambiguous, waist-high in places, the ground beneath it uneven and soft, in ways that made every step feel slightly uncertain. Hargrove rose ahead of us as we approached, and I want to describe it properly because the building itself, even before we entered it, was already doing something to the air around it. It was 4 stories of red brick gone dark with age and weather, Victorian in its bones, with the kind of ornate architectural detailing. Arched windows, decorative cornices, a roofline that jutted and peaked in patterns that seemed arbitrary until you were close enough to see they formed something almost like a face. Not literally. Not in a way I could point to and say, there are the eyes, there is the mouth. But there was something in the arrangement of the upper windows and the shadow of the roofline that the eye kept trying to organize into features. I kept not looking at it directly. I kept catching it in my peripheral vision and then finding something else to focus on. "It's bigger than the photos," Marcus said quietly, and I think he meant it as a neutral observation, but it didn't come out that way. It came out the way you say something when a thing is bigger than you expected, and the size of it is part of what's unsettling you. 1,200 patients at its peak, Deja said. Her voice was tour guide steady. "You need a big building for 1,200 people." Tyler had the chain off the service door in under 2 minutes. He stepped back and held it open, and we filed in one by one, and the darkness inside swallowed us. The smell hit me first. It always does in places like this. I had been in enough abandoned buildings to know that every one of them has its own particular smell, a signature built from the specific combination of materials used in its construction and the specific history of what happened inside it. Hargrove smelled like mold, the deep-rooted kind that has been in the walls for decades and become structural, part of the building rather than something growing on it. Under that rust, metal oxidizing slowly in the damp air. Under that, something I could not name and could not stop noticing, something that sat at the back of my sinuses and wouldn't leave. Organic, ancient, faintly sweet in a way that made my stomach do something unpleasant. "Okay," Ryan said, flashlights on, voice steady. "North Wing Administrative. Let's take it slow." We took it slow. The administrative corridor was long and straight, floored in cracked linoleum that had once been institutional green and was now the color of old teeth. Filing cabinets lined the walls in places, their drawers hanging open, their contents composted into unreadable masses. Office doors stood open on either side, the bureaucratic machinery that had administered all that suffering from a safe distance. A reception desk in the main lobby, its surface buried under a fur of gray dust so thick it had texture. A coffee mug on the desk, still there after 37 years, a brown ring inside it. Someone had left it planning to come back. Noah photographed the mug. I don't know why, but I remember being glad he did. I was filming everything, panning slowly, letting the camera find its own logic in the space, the way I'd learned to do. There's a thing that happens when you put a lens between yourself and something frightening. It doesn't make the fear go away. It gives the fear somewhere to go. You channel it into the frame, into the composition, into the question of what to include and what to leave out. It makes the horror manageable. Or it usually does. In Hargrove, from almost the first moment, I felt the camera failing at the job, felt the fear finding its way around the lens and into me anyway. Something about the building refused to be aestheticized, refused to be framed and contained and made into something you could look at from a safe distance. It kept insisting on its own reality in a way that made every shot I took feel slightly dishonest, like I was trying to make a portrait of something that didn't want to be seen. I lowered the camera more than I raised it that first hour. I kept it close to my body like a talisman. It was 40 minutes in when I first noticed something was wrong with Deja. She had been quiet for a while, longer than usual, which for Deja was notable because she was the group's narrator, its context machine, always providing the framework for what we were seeing. But she had trailed off somewhere in the administrative wing, and now she was just walking, her flashlight pointed at the floor, her face turned slightly inward. I fell into step beside her. "You okay?" She didn't answer immediately. Then, "Do you hear that?" I stopped walking, listened. The building had sounds. Settling, the distant complaint of pipes, wind finding gaps in the structure and moving through them in ways that created tones, almost musical. Old buildings breathe in their way. I'd learned to listen past the surface sounds for anything underneath. "Keep walking," Deja said. It stops when you stop. I walked, and there it was. Not quite audible enough to be certain of. A rhythm, low and slow, that was almost breathing, almost. The way a thing can be almost something without committing to it, without giving you anything solid enough to point to. Old buildings make sounds, I said. I know, Deja said. I've been in as many old buildings as you have. She looked at me, and her expression was something I had never seen on her face before. Not fear exactly. Deja was too rational for what I'd call fear. It was the expression of someone who has run the numbers and found that the numbers don't add up and cannot figure out why. I know that, she said again softly. I know what old buildings sound like, and I know that's not what this is. I should have taken that more seriously. I should have said, let's talk about this with the group. Let's reconsider. But I was 24 and I had a camera, and I had been in a dozen abandoned buildings, and nothing had ever actually gone wrong. And so I filed Deja's unease in the category of things that would make sense later and kept walking. That is one of the things I will regret for the rest of my life, however long that is. We found the main staircase and went up to the second floor. The stairs were stone, solid, in better condition than the rest of the building. Victorian craftsmanship, built to last. The banisters were wrought iron, elaborately worked into patterns that I tried not to look at too closely because the patterns kept seeming to mean something, to be almost something. The way a word looks wrong when you stare at it too long even when it's spelled correctly. The second floor corridor was long and dim and lined on both sides with patient rooms. Heavy doors, most of them open. Small rooms, shockingly small when you stood in the doorway and really registered the dimensions. Barely enough space for the metal bed frame and the body that had slept on it. The mattresses had composted over the decades into something unrecognizable, dark and flattened, indistinguishable at a glance from the floor itself. In some rooms, personal items had survived the decades, a hairbrush, the bristles long since rotted away, a single shoe, a child's drawing pinned to the wall. The drawing showed a house and a sun and two figures with round heads and stick arms standing in front of the house. Smiling mouths drawn in a child's hand. The most ordinary image in the world, and it stopped me completely because a child had been here. In this place, in this institution, in one of these unbearably small rooms, a child had sat and drawn a picture of a house and the people they missed. I filmed it for a long time. My hands were shaking slightly. I didn't notice until I reviewed the footage later. We were halfway down the corridor when Marcus stopped. Guys. His voice had changed. Something in the register of it. Lower, more careful. The laugh entirely absent. Look at the walls. We looked. Someone had written on them. Not graffiti, not the casual tagging and signatures you find in every abandoned building, every explorer's name immortalized in spray paint. This was older, done in what looked like pencil or charcoal, dense and cramped, words layered over older words, layered over older words still. Some of it in languages I couldn't identify. Some of it illegible with age, and some of it in plain English that I could read perfectly clearly and immediately wished I couldn't. They watch through the walls. They have always been in the walls. The doctor knows what you think before you think it. He told me, so he told me, so he told me. Do not sleep here. They come when you sleep. They have been coming for me every night for 11 months. If you are reading this, do not sleep here. The sounds are not the building. Do not believe anyone who tells you the sounds are the building. And then the one that made the air go out of my lungs. The one I have seen behind my eyes every night since then when I try to sleep. I am still myself, I am still myself, I am still myself, I am still myself, I am still myself. Repeated, over and over. The same sentence, the same handwriting, but handwriting that changed as it went, that got larger and more erratic and less controlled with each repetition. The letters beginning to lose their shape, the words beginning to drift from the baseline until the final repetitions were barely recognizable as language. Just the desperate physical insistence of someone pressing something into a wall, trying to leave a mark, trying to prove to whoever might someday read it that they had been here and had been a person and had known it. The last repetition was so large it took up most of the wall. Each letter carved rather than written, pressed so hard into the plaster that the writer's fingers had gone through to the lath beneath. At the very end, after the last myself, a period. Clean, deliberate, final. Patient writing, Deja said. Her voice was doing something complicated, staying level through what I could tell was significant effort. They were here for years, some of them. Decades. This is actually a significant historical. She stopped. In the silence that followed, all 6 of us heard it. Not the maybe breathing from before. A voice. Coming from below us, from the south wing, low and rhythmic and repeating something we couldn't make out from this distance, but that had the cadence of a chant. The cadence of someone saying the same thing over and over, the cadence of someone who had been saying it for a very long time. We stood in that corridor full of writing that begged us not to stay, and we listened to the voice rising from below, and nobody moved for what felt like a very long time. There's someone else in the building, Tyler said. Flat. Factual. Security? Noah said. He was already angled toward the staircase. Security doesn't chant, Marcus said. We go look, Ryan said. We went. The transition from the administrative wing to the south wing happened at a set of double doors that connected the 2 halves of the building, and I want to be precise about what I felt when we pushed through them because it was immediate and physical and unlike anything I'd experienced in any other building in my life. The air changed, not the temperature, or not only the temperature, though it did drop noticeably, enough that our breath began to mist in the beams of our flashlights. It was something else, something that I don't have a precise word for. A density, a pressure low and pervasive, like the air in the south wing was carrying more weight than air should carry, like it was full of something that couldn't be seen. And the smell. I mentioned the smell of the administrative wing. The mold, the rust, the old organic sweetness underneath. In the south wing, all of that was still present, but underneath it was something new, something sharp and chemical that made my eyes water slightly. Antiseptic, clean. The smell of a place that is actively being maintained in the middle of a building that has been abandoned for nearly 4 decades. It made no sense, and yet there it was. Do you smell that? I asked. Bleach, Deja said immediately, or something like it. She was looking at the walls, which here were different from the administrative wing. Older, more damaged, the plaster fallen away in large sections to reveal the brick beneath. But the writing was here too, denser than upstairs, layered so thick in some sections that the original wall surface was invisible beneath it. That's not possible, Ryan said. The building has been closed. I know it's not possible, Deja said. I'm telling you what I smell. The chanting had stopped. Somewhere between the double doors and here, it had simply ceased, cutting off mid-rhythm the way a recording cuts when the power dies. The silence it left behind was the particular silence of a space that has just been full of sound and is now aggressively empty. The corridor of the south wing stretched ahead of us. Unlike upstairs, the patient room doors were mostly closed. The windows in the doors, small reinforced glass panels at eye level, had been covered from the inside. Newspaper, fabric, what looked in some cases like layers of painted on, something dark and opaque. Whatever was in those rooms, something had not wanted to be looked at. The door at the far end of the corridor slammed. The sound was enormous in the silence, a full-throated, reverberating bang that hit us like a physical blow. Noah made a sound. I grabbed his arm, and my heart was doing something violent in my chest, and the rational part of my brain was already generating explanations. Pressure differential, structural settling, the building's response to our movement through it. The rational part of my brain was working very hard and convincing no one. Marcus's flashlight swept the corridor in a fast, practiced arc. Empty. The door at the end, closed. The silence returning, heavier than before. "Wind," Tyler said. "We're inside a sealed building," I said. "There's no—" "I know," Tyler said. "I know that." And then, in the corridor, in the beam of my flashlight, I saw her. I need to stop here and breathe before I describe this, because even now, weeks later, sitting in my closet with the light on, the memory of what I saw in that corridor does something to my body that I can't fully control. My hands are shaking right now. I'm going to tell you anyway because you need to know. Because it matters. She was standing at the far end of the corridor, between our group and the slammed door. She was wearing a hospital gown, the institutional kind, faded, too large, hanging off one shoulder. She was facing us. She was a woman, or had the shape of a woman, tall and thin in the way that isn't health but its absence. Her arms were at her sides, her hands were slightly open, palms forward, in a gesture that I spent weeks trying not to interpret as supplication and failing. Where her face should have been, there was nothing. Not darkness, not a blur, not a shadow, not the absence of detail that you get when something is too far away or too dimly lit to resolve. The space above her neck and below her hairline was smooth, unbroken, continuous pale skin, unblemished, without feature, no eyes, no nose, no mouth, just a surface gently curved like a mask worn backward. She raised one hand. She beckoned. "Do you see that?" I said. It wasn't a question. My voice had no effect. It was perfectly flat, the voice of someone whose body has used all available resources for the purpose of not falling down and has nothing left for things like intonation. "I see it," Ryan said. Same voice, same flatness. She was gone. Between one blink and the next, the corridor was empty. She had not moved, had not walked away, had simply ceased to be visible in the space where she had been, the way an afterimage ceases when you look away from the light that made it. We stood in the corridor for a long time after that. Nobody spoke. The antiseptic smell seemed stronger. The pressure in the air seemed heavier. I was still holding Noah's arm, and he was still holding mine. And I remember thinking very clearly, in a small, rational voice, at the center of all the noise my nervous system was making, we should leave now. We should go. We should turn around and go through the double doors and through the administrative wing and out the service entrance and drive away and never come back. I did not say this out loud. I don't know why. I think I was afraid that saying it out loud would make it real. And some part of me, the part that had watched too many scary movies and read too many horror stories, was still insisting that there had to be an explanation. That we had misperceived. That the brain does strange things in the dark in old buildings, and we were all going to feel slightly foolish about this in the morning. "We should keep moving," Ryan said. We kept moving. Back on the second floor, Tyler found the door. Ryan was the one who pointed it out, stopped mid-stride and directed his flashlight at the wall between rooms 11 and 12, and said, very quietly, That's not on the floor plan. The door was steel, heavy, institutional, with a locking mechanism that looked wrong in a way I took a moment to identify and then wished I hadn't. It was newer than everything else. The metal was less corroded, the hinges less oxidized. Someone had installed this door after the asylum closed, maybe years after, maybe not very long ago. Around its frame, pressed into the plaster with a precision that bordered on obsessive, was writing. The same cramped, patient script from the corridor, but here arranged deliberately, not layered and overlapping, but organized into a single unbroken line, circling the door frame from floor to ceiling and back again. One sentence, repeated without interruption, not even a space between repetitions, so that it formed a continuous ring of text. Don't open it, 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 here, don't open it. How long do you think that took someone? Marcus said softly. A long time, Deja said. A very long time. I filmed the door for over a minute. I zoomed in on the writing, on the lock mechanism, on the gap at the base of the door through which came the faintest thread of air. Cold air, colder than the rest of the floor, colder than anything in the building had any reason to be. The air came out in a slow, steady pulse that was completely, utterly, unmistakably rhythmic, like breathing, coming from behind the door. We're not opening that, Ryan said. Not a question, a decision. He said it the way you say something when you need to say it out loud because you're afraid that without the words, you might do it anyway. We didn't open the door. We went back downstairs. The decision to split up was made in the south wing corridor, standing in the spot where we had seen the woman who had no face, which in retrospect says everything about the state we were in. We weren't thinking clearly. We were pushing down fear with routine, with process, with the familiar logic of explore methodology, and the familiar logic was failing us completely. Marcus and Deja took the south wing lower level, the treatment rooms. Tyler went looking for the basement access and the isolation rooms. Noah and I stayed together on the second floor. Ryan went up to the third floor alone. We synced watches. We agreed on check-in protocol. We said things like, be careful and text if anything feels off, with the confidence of people who still believe that text messages are adequate protection against the things that were in that building. I watched Ryan disappear up the staircase. I watched Tyler move down the south wing corridor. I watched Marcus put his arm around Deja and felt a small, warm thing at the sight of it. The easy physical comfort of people who have been together long enough that touch is reflexive. That was the last time I saw Deja. Noah and I documented the second floor patient rooms systematically. He held the second flashlight while I filmed, and he was, I want to say this, genuinely steady. Whatever he was feeling, and I know he was terrified, he kept it quiet and close because he could see that I needed the steadiness, and he chose, repeatedly and deliberately, to give it to me. 20 minutes in, we checked in. Everyone responded. Marcus's voice was tight but controlled. Deja confirmed they were in the treatment rooms, and it was intense, but they were okay. Ryan from the third floor, steady. Tyler, no answer, but Tyler always forgot. Nothing to worry about. We kept moving. I was filming the doorway of room 16 when I heard the sound. Not the chanting from earlier, not the building's ambient sounds, something specific and close and directional coming from the stairwell at the south end of the corridor. A wet, rhythmic sound that I could not immediately identify and then did identify and immediately wished I hadn't. It sounded like something being dragged, something heavy and limp and unresisting being pulled across a stone floor. It went on for 10 seconds and then stopped. Ryan, I said into the phone. Ryan, there's something in the south stairwell. Static, then, say again. There's a sound in the south stairwell, a dragging sound. We're at the south end of the second floor and I The phone went dead. Not lost signal. Dead. The call ended. The screen went dark. The phone that had been at 63% battery was now completely inexplicably off. I pressed the power button. Nothing. I pressed it again, held it. Nothing. Noah's phone was still on. He called Ryan. Got voicemail, called Marcus. 6 rings voicemail, called Tyler. The call connected, but no one spoke, just the sound of breathing on the other end. Slow and measured and wrong, somehow, in a way Noah couldn't articulate, but that made him hang up without saying anything. "We need to find Ryan," Noah said. "We need to stay in the room," I said, because the dragging sound had started again, and it was closer than before. Right outside the door of the room we were in, right there, just on the other side of the wall, something moving through the corridor that we could hear, but that, when I made myself look through the gap in the door, showed me nothing but empty hallway. Empty hallway and the smell. The antiseptic smell, sudden and overwhelming, so strong it made my eyes water, and I have learned since then that the smell is the warning. By the time you can smell it clearly, it is already in the room with you. I did not know that yet. "Cassie," Noah said very quietly, "don't look at the window." There was a window in the door of room 16. A small, reinforced glass panel at eye level. The kind you find in hospital doors, in institutional spaces so that staff can see in without opening the door. Something was looking through it from the other side. I know because I could see it in Noah's face. He was looking at me. Not at the door, with the focused deliberateness of someone who has decided not to look at something and is devoting every available resource to that decision. And his face was the color of old chalk, and his hands, both of them, were shaking. I did not look at the window. I have thought about this many times since, whether looking would have changed anything, whether I could have seen something that would have told me what it was, but I made the choice in that moment to not look, and I made it because some animal part of me, the part that lives below language and reason, the part that has been keeping humans alive in dark places since before we had words for dark or places, knew with absolute certainty that looking was what it wanted me to do. I didn't look. The smell faded. The sound in the corridor stopped. The shadow I could see in my peripheral vision at the edge of the window moved away. We sat on the floor of room 16 with our backs against the wall, farthest from the door, and waited, with the flashlight between us, until Ryan knocked and said his name. I'm going to tell you what Ryan told me he found in the treatment rooms, because he told me everything, afterward, and he was detailed and precise because that's how he processes things. I wasn't there, but I'm going to tell it because it matters, because Marcus and Deja deserve to have it witnessed. The treatment rooms were a series of 8 chambers along the east side of the south wing corridor. Ryan found them with Marcus's backup flashlight. His own had died in the stairwell, between floors, the beam simply ceasing as if something had reached in and turned it off. The first room stopped him in the doorway. The restraint table was original, a steel slab bolted to the floor, its surface deeply pitted with rust and use, the leather straps at the wrists, ankles, and chest still attached. They had passed through this room earlier and noted it and moved on. They had not noted, or the straps had not yet been this way when they passed through, the fact that the restraints had been torn. Not unbuckled, not cut, not failed through age and decay. Torn, the leather shredded outward in thick strips as if the person restrained in them had simply expanded, or convulsed, with a force far beyond what leather is designed to contain. The wall behind the table was covered in handprints, not painted, not inked, pressed into the plaster in something dark and wet that had run in thin lines from the palm and fingers of each print, suggesting heat, suggesting pressure, suggesting a temperature that dried the prints at their edges while the centers still glistened. Dozens of prints, overlapping, frantic, covering the wall from floor to ceiling. At the floor level, the prints were large and spaced, deliberate, almost calm. Higher up, they became smaller and closer together, more frantic, as if the person making them had been climbing, had been trying desperately to find a way through the ceiling. The prints packed so closely together near the top of the wall that individual hands were impossible to distinguish from the mass of them. The ceiling was intact, unbroken. Whatever made those prints hadn't gotten through. The second room contained Marcus's backpack, opened, its contents spread in a precise circle on the floor. Battery packs, granola bars, the emergency Mylar blanket, the spare flashlight. All of it arranged with a care that was its own kind of horror, a deliberateness that implied something had gone through the bag with a purpose Ryan couldn't identify. In the center of the circle stood the ECT machine, pulled from its housing against the wall and repositioned, its cables trailing, its dials turned to settings that Ryan recognized, even without medical knowledge, as catastrophically wrong. The numbers were as far from center as they could go, as far toward maximum as the dials allowed. The machine was warm to the touch, not room temperature, not residual heat from some mechanical function it hadn't performed in 40 years. Hot, the sustained heat of a machine that has been running recently, that has been used. Ryan said the smell in that room was the worst thing. He said it was a smell he didn't have a word for, and then, after a long silence, he said, electricity. Burned hair, burned skin. The smell of biological tissue responding to current at a level it was never designed to survive. He said it was sweet in a way that made it worse. He said he had to put his shirt over his face to stay in the room long enough to look for Marcus and Deja. Marcus's jacket was on the floor. Only the jacket. The third room was the one with Deja's phone. Screen cracked, battery at 3%. The Notes app opened to an entry time-stamped 1:47 a.m. 40 minutes after we split up. Ryan read it to me later, word for word, and I have it memorized in the way you memorize things you wish you could forget. The door won't open from inside. Marcus is... I can't. Something is here with us. It's been here since we came in. It was waiting. The smell, Ryan, if you find this... The smell is what tells you it's close. The smell is how you know. When you smell the clean smell, that's when it's already inside the room with you and you can't. The entry stopped there. Mid-sentence, mid-word. The restraint chair in this room was upright, designed to hold a person seated and immobile while things were done to them. The leather was darkened with moisture. The armrests bent backward at angles that required either enormous, deliberate force or something Ryan didn't want to think about. The steel of the left armrest was twisted at the base, not broken, not snapped, but twisted, as if someone had grabbed it and rotated it the way you'd wring out a wet cloth. On the seat of the chair was Marcus's St. Christopher medal. Ryan told me about this, and his voice broke in a way that his voice, in my experience of him, never broke. The medal Marcus's mother had given him when he was 12. The one he wore every single day without exception. The chain hadn't been unclasped. It had been snapped under pressure. The medal itself was undamaged, perfectly clean, sitting centered on the seat of the chair as if it had been placed there with care, as if it was meant to be found, as if something wanted Ryan to know that Marcus had been here and was gone, and the taking of him had been deliberate and complete. The wall of this room was different from the others. Only one line of writing. 4 repetitions, in handwriting that was unmistakably Deja's. Ryan knew it, I knew it. Anyone who had ever received a note from her would know it. Clear, precise, distinctive. I am still myself. I am still myself. I am still myself. I am still myself. 4 times. each one slightly larger than the last. The fourth filled nearly the entire wall, each letter a foot tall, pressed so hard into the plaster that Deja's fingers had gone through to the lath beneath. The plaster around the letters was scored with smaller marks, fingernails, Ryan thought, dragged across the surface in the spaces between words, like she was holding on to the wall, like she needed something to hold on to. At the end of the fourth repetition, a period. Clean. Deliberate. Final. Ryan stood in that room for a long time. He said he stood there and talked to the walls, and he didn't care how that sounded because Marcus was in that room somewhere, or he wasn't anywhere, and either way Ryan was going to say his name until he didn't have any breath left. He found me and Noah after that. He knocked on the door of room 16 and said his name, and I have never been so grateful to hear any sound in my life. We went to find Tyler. Ryan had called him 3 times without answer. The fourth call connected, and Ryan said Tyler's name, and Tyler said, "I'm in the basement. Come down. Bring Cassie and Noah." His voice was wrong. Ryan described it as flat, and that's the word I would use too. Flat like a surface that has had everything removed from it, all the texture and variation that makes a voice recognizably belong to a person. Like Tyler's voice being produced by something that had studied Tyler's voice but didn't fully understand what made it his. Noah held my hand the entire way to the basement staircase. I held his back. The basement of Hargrove was accessed through a door in the south wing that Tyler had propped open with a piece of debris. The staircase was narrow and steep, and the walls on either side were bare brick, close enough to brush with your shoulders if you weren't careful, and the antiseptic smell was overwhelming. Stronger than anywhere above, strong enough to make my eyes stream, strong enough to taste on the back of my throat like metal and clean horror. The isolation corridor was exactly as Deja had described. 8 doors set into the right-hand wall, each one solid steel, each one with a slot at the base. The rooms beyond the open doors were tiny, smaller than I had pictured, smaller than seemed possible for human habitation, even in an institution that cared nothing for the humans in its care. Smooth walls, a drain in the center of the floor, nothing else. What happens to a mind in total darkness, in total silence, for days at a time? I know more about this than I did before. The brain, deprived of external input, begins to generate its own. Hallucinations so vivid that patients could not distinguish them from reality. Auditory hallucinations first, voices, sounds, music, then visual. Then, in prolonged cases, tactile. The sensation of being touched, of something present in the room, of company in the darkness that the rational mind knows is not there, and the suffering mind reaches toward anyway, because anything is better than nothing. I thought about this standing in that corridor, and I felt something break open in my chest that had no name. Tyler was at the end of the corridor, standing outside the last door on the left, the only closed door. "Where's Marcus?" Ryan asked. Tyler turned to look at us, and I knew immediately. I knew before he spoke, before he moved, before he did anything to justify the knowing. Something about the way he held himself, too still, too composed, the stillness of something that has put on stillness as a costume rather than something that actually inhabits it. His eyes were wrong, not the color, not the shape, the quality of the attention behind them. It was looking at us rather than seeing us. "He went in," Tyler said. Ryan stared at him. "What do you mean he went in?" He said he could hear Deja calling from inside the room. I told him that wasn't possible. He said he could hear her. He opened the door and went in. A pause, perfectly timed but somehow mechanical. That was a while ago. Ryan pushed past Tyler and grabbed the door handle and pulled it open. The room was empty. Smooth walls, drain in the center, darkness. No Marcus, no exit. a space the size of a large closet, completely and unambiguously unoccupied. Ryan shone his light into every corner, knocked on the walls, solid, no cavities, got on his knees and examined the drain, old, corroded, sealed with decades of oxidation. There was nowhere to go. There was no way out. And then, from directly above, from the ceiling of the room, from the featureless plaster ceiling that showed no seam, no panel, no structural anomaly of any kind, the knocking started. 3 knocks. Slow, deliberate. Each one separated from the next by exactly the same interval, the regularity of it more disturbing than frantic knocking would have been. And then Marcus's voice, muffled by the ceiling, distorted, but unmistakably his. The specific timbre of it, the register, the way he shaped vowels. Ryan. 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 Ryan screamed his name back. He hit the ceiling with his flashlight. He went into the corridor and screamed for Deja. The building absorbed his voice the way it absorbed everything else and gave nothing back. When he turned around, Tyler was gone. I want to tell you we left with dignity, that we made a tactical decision to evacuate and executed it calmly. But that's not what happened. What happened is that Noah grabbed my arm and said, "We need to go now," in the voice of someone who has used up every available reserve of composure, and Ryan appeared at the top of the basement stairs with a face that told us everything we needed to know about what he had found, and we ran. Through the south wing, through the double doors, through the administrative wing with its filing cabinets and its reception desk and its abandoned coffee cup, to the service entrance in the north corridor. The lock was new. A clean, modern padlock on a door we had walked through hours earlier without any lock at all. Not rusted, not old, new and secured and immovable. Noah pulled at it. Ryan pulled at it. I looked at Ryan, and Ryan looked at me, and neither of us had any words left. "The front entrance," Ryan said. "The main double doors. They were visible from the road, but it's after 2 in the morning, and there's no one on that road." We went back through the administrative wing. We went to the main double doors. They were standing open, just slightly, just enough for one person to slip through at a time. The parking lot was visible beyond them. The orange safety lights on their poles, our cars, the road, the dark field. Everything normal, everything mundane. Everything that existed outside this building and its hunger. She was standing in the gap, the woman with no face, in her hospital gown, one shoulder bare, arms at her sides, occupying the exact space between us and the outside world, the smooth, unbroken surface where her face should have been catching the orange light from the parking lot and doing something wrong with it, something that made the light seem less like light and more like a stain. Noah made a sound. Ryan grabbed both of us. "Don't look at the face," I said. And here is the thing I have thought about every single day since Hargrove. I had seen her face. I had seen the absence of it. I had looked directly at her in the south wing corridor and felt something happen. Not in my eyes, but behind them. Not vision, but something below vision. Something that reached into me and touched something I did not know was there. And in that moment at the front doors, looking at the floor, shuffling forward 3 abreast with our eyes down and our hearts slamming and the antiseptic smell suddenly everywhere, close inside our breathing, I felt it again. The reaching, the touching, the sense of something locating me with precision and filing me away, noting me, keeping me. We walked through the gap. We walked past her. I felt the displacement of air as we passed the space she occupied. Cold air, precisely localized, like walking through a doorway into a room where the air conditioning is on. And then we were outside. The door behind us did not close. I know because I heard nothing. When I finally turned around, 50 feet from the building, The front doors were standing open, in exactly the way they had been when we walked through. Empty. The corridor beyond dark and still. No woman in the doorway, no woman anywhere. We ran to the cars. The police searched Hargrove 2 days later. Ryan filed the report, gave them everything. The blood in the treatment rooms, matching Marcus's type. The disturbed restraints. Deja's phone, which they found where Ryan described it with the battery now completely dead. Marcus's jacket. His St. Christopher medal, still on the seat of the restraint chair. No bodies, no Marcus, no Deja. No explanation for the padlock on the service entrance, which was gone by the time the police searched. The door stood open, the original chain lying on the floor. No sign of any new lock. No explanation for the ECT machine's warmth, which the forensic team's report noted with the careful neutrality of people who have no framework for what they're noting. No explanation for the writing on the wall of the third treatment room. Deja's handwriting, confirmed by a forensic document examiner who spent 3 hours with the samples and said, twice, unprompted, that he found the case disturbing, that the word he kept coming back to was impossible. Tyler is alive, or something wearing Tyler is alive. He appeared at Ryan's apartment 3 weeks after Hargrove and sat at Ryan's kitchen table and drank a glass of water. He said he was fine. He said he got out through a window in the east wing. He said everything was okay. When Ryan said Marcus's name, Tyler blinked, slowly, deliberately, each lid lowering and rising like something being manually operated, and said, "Who?" Ryan called me after Tyler left. His voice was quiet and careful in the way of someone carrying something very heavy. He told me what Tyler had said. He told me about the blink. I told Ryan to lock his doors. That was 2 weeks ago. I need to be careful about the order of this. I need to be precise because I know how this sounds, and I know the tendency, when you hear things like this, to reach for explanations. Stress-induced perception. Sleep deprivation. The overactive pattern recognition of a mind that has been through trauma looking for threats in benign stimuli. I have considered all of these explanations. I have held each one up to what I've experienced and examined it carefully. I have tried, genuinely and effortfully, to believe them. I can't. The first thing happened 4 days after Hargrove. I woke at 3 a.m. to the smell. The antiseptic smell, sharp and immediate, filling my bedroom as completely as if someone had opened a bottle of bleach directly under my nose. I lay completely still in my bed and breathed it, and felt my heart doing the thing it had learned to do in that building. The low, sustained hammering of an animal that knows something is wrong and is preparing accordingly. The smell faded after maybe 2 minutes. I turned the light on. My bedroom was empty. The window was closed. There was nothing in the room that could have produced that smell. I slept with the light on for the next week. The second thing happened 6 days after Hargrove. I was editing footage, the footage from that night, which I had been working up the courage to review for 3 days. And in the footage from the South Wing corridor, the footage I shot before what happened to me, before I lost time, before I found myself walking in circles with my camera pointed at the floor, there is a moment. I have watched this moment approximately 300 times. I have slowed it down. I have frame advanced through it. I have increased the brightness and the contrast and applied every filter I have access to. At the south end of the second floor corridor, in the beam of my flashlight, for 4 frames, 1/6 of a second, there is a figure, standing between rooms 11 and 12, in a hospital gown. Still, watching. Then, the space where the face should be is white in the footage, not dark, not undefined. White. like something is emitting light from that space rather than receiving it. 4 frames, 1/6 of a second, and then she's gone. I didn't see her in the corridor that night. Only in the south wing, later, when we all saw her. Which means she was there before I ever looked for her. Which means she was watching from the beginning. The third thing happened 8 days after Hargrove. Noah and I were at my apartment. We were sitting on the couch watching something deliberately normal, something comfortable and familiar. And Noah said, without looking away from the television, "Cassie, don't look at the hallway." I looked at the hallway. At the far end of it, at the boundary where the hallway met the darkness of my bedroom, there was a shape, just at the edge of definition, just far enough from the light that the details wouldn't resolve. The shape of a person. Still. Watching. The faint suggestion of arms at the sides, hands slightly open, in a gesture that I'd seen before in a corridor in a building 20 miles away. She was here. She had followed me home. Noah grabbed my arm. I looked away. When we looked back, the hallway was empty. We checked every room, every closet, every space large enough to contain a person. Nothing. Noah didn't go home that night. He slept on my couch with every light in the apartment on. In the morning, he looked at me with the eyes of someone who has spent a night listening for something and found the listening more frightening than whatever he was listening for. And he said, "We should go somewhere. Both of us. We should leave this apartment and go somewhere else for a while." I think he was right. I think he was absolutely right. I didn't leave. I don't know why. The sense that leaving would accomplish nothing. That distance was irrelevant. That she had already located me in the way that mattered, the deep way, the way that has nothing to do with geography. That wherever I went, the smell would follow. The fourth thing happened last night. I'm recording this from my closet because last night I went to bed at 11 and woke at 3 a.m. to the smell, stronger than it has ever been, filling the apartment, filling my lungs, so thick I could feel it coating the back of my throat. I lay still. I kept my eyes on the ceiling. I counted my breaths, and I thought about Marcus laughing, and I thought about Deja's handwriting on the wall, and I thought about Noah asleep on my couch, and I thought, this is the night. I don't know how I knew. I knew the way you know things when your body has more information than your mind. When the animal in you has been tracking something that your reasoning self hasn't caught up to yet. This is the night. I got up quietly and I went to the closet and I pulled the door shut and I turned the light on and I started recording. Because someone should know. Because Marcus and Deja deserve to have the whole story told. Because if someone finds this, if you're listening to this and trying to understand what happened to us, I want you to have everything. Hargrove didn't let us go. I thought we escaped. I thought the moment we cleared those front doors, we were free. But that's not how it works. The woman with no face chose me in that south wing corridor, in the beam of my flashlight, 4 frames that I didn't even know were happening. She noted me. She filed me away. She sent me home the way you send a letter, fully intending it to arrive. I can hear her now. Outside the closet door. The sound of something moving through an apartment that I know is empty, in a pattern I've learned to recognize. The circuit she traces, room to room. Slow and methodical, the way she walked that corridor. Looking, orienting, coming to the conclusion. The smell is very strong. If you find this recording, if Noah finds this, if Ryan finds this, if anyone finds this, I need you to know one thing. One thing above everything else. Don't go to Hargrove. Don't go there. Don't let curiosity take you there. Don't let someone talk you into it the way Ryan talked me into it, the way the footage and the history and the promise of something real and true and terrifying talked me into it. The building is still there. The fence is new, but the fence doesn't matter. The building has been waiting for 37 years, and it has gotten very good at waiting. It will wait for you, too. It will wait for... Epilogue. The recording ends here. The following is a transcription of a voicemail left on the phone of Ryan Walsh at 4:17 a.m., October 19th, 2024. Ryan, it's Noah. I'm outside Cassie's apartment building. She won't answer the door. She won't answer her phone. I came because she texted me at 2 in the morning, just the word come, and I didn't see it until 4, and I drove over and the lights in her apartment are all on. All of them. Every light is on. I can see her camera on the counter through the window. She left her camera. Ryan, there's a smell coming from under the door. I didn't know what it was at first, and then I did, and I don't... Long pause. I'm going in. I have her spare key. I'm going in. Ryan, if you get this before I call back, call me. Call me right away. I'm going in now. Noah Park did not call back. His phone was found on the floor of Cassie Reyes's apartment hallway 3 days later, when Ryan Walsh requested a welfare check. The phone's storage contained one new file. This recording. Ryan Walsh has listened to it 41 times. He has not gone back to Hargrove. He thinks about going every day. If you made it to the end, thank you for listening. If you're new here, subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss the next one. Drop a comment below and tell me the moment that got you the most. And if you're driving home alone right now, maybe don't look in the rearview mirror. Sleep well.